Hi everyone, welcome to Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast. This podcast is all about farmers markets, how to increase your market business success, and in our current climate, maximize safety while providing people with fresh food. Farmers markets are essential. Whether you're a farmers market manager or a small farmer or food maker selling at farmers markets, you have found just the right podcast. This week we're discussing how to support your farmers market community through the loss of a farmer or vendor, especially when it's a sad goodbye. I'm one of your hosts, Bridget Myers. I'm a longtime Farmers Market Manager, Vendor 101 co-teacher, and Education Coordinator at Farmers Market Pros.
And I'm Kat Fields-White, Director of San Diego Markets, still an active Farmers Market Manager, founder of Farmers Market Pros, and host of Intense, the Farmers Market Conference, and the Farmers Market Pros community.
And I'm Justine Marzoni-Mead, Tent Talk producer and marketing director for Farmers Market Pros.
Today's episode of Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast, is supported by the National Farmers Market Coalition, giving farmers markets a voice in public policy and strengthening farmers markets for the benefit of farmers, consumers, and communities. Find more information at farmersmarketcoalition.org or by clicking their logo on the resource page at farmersmarketpros.com.
Welcome back to Tent Talk. Today on our show, we're discussing what happens when we have to say goodbye to a farmer or vendor and how to help our market communities process loss. We're not talking about the natural attrition process so much today. Sometimes a new vendor never quite clicks, or a product is seasonal or trendy. Can you say cake pops? Not that that's a bad thing. But what we're talking about in this conversation is what happens when a long-established vendor leaves your market.
And that can happen all kinds of different ways.
Yes.
Yeah.
So an easy one, not easy, but a little bit easier to process, is sometimes vendors grow. They leave the market to open a brick and mortar, or they move towards wholesale, or they sell their business. And those are pretty straightforward conversations, although you may need to have them for years after a vendor leaves. I mean, how many people still ask about bitchin' sauce?
Literally last Saturday, somebody asked for bitchin' sauce.
Or
And baby
people
Clydesdale,
like,
actually.
It was like here last week, and I'm like, no, it wasn't.
Literally been years.
That's the funny ones when they say, I always get this here. It's like, they've been gone for 3 years.
Yeah.
Like they
It's
buy it at Costco.
Go to Costco, yeah.
And they think that it's at the farmer's market because that's where they first experienced them. I mean, it does say something to the kind of how that lives in their heart, that's a farmer's market product. So that's
true.
great.
And that's good.
Yeah.
And you want to celebrate that. You know, you want to go, rah, this vendor, opened their own restaurant.
Yeah.
But you also want to be careful not to position leaving the market as hitting the big time. You know,
Yeah.
they outgrew the farmer's market because markets and other types of businesses are two different kinds of success. It's not that one's more successful than the other. So you just want to be careful about how you phrase that.
Yeah, and you don't want to make it seem like the whole point of a farmer's market is to just grow out into a store or a wholesale thing, because it's not.
Yeah.
It's not. You know, it just depends on that market vendor's trajectory.
Yeah.
That's right.
And it is kind of tricky sometimes because shoppers will be like, oh, well, this happens. For example, we have another amazing bakery in town that used to be a vendor, and since COVID, they've opened up a couple of different brick and mortars, and so they're just not at the markets or not at our market right now. But I think shoppers just assume that we keep really close tabs on everyone, and sometimes it's hard if it's a vendor that it was years ago they were at their market, and I have had shoppers get a little fussy that I don't know exactly where to find them.
What are their hours in that shop?
Yeah,
Do they still sell this particular item? I'm like, I don't know.
Google.
Well, and the other thing is you want to find a balance between pointing shoppers to a vendor's new outlet and promoting the same category of current vendors. You know, our job is to keep people at the market. So while, we don't have a problem with them going over to the bakery, in the meantime, if you need a baguette this morning, run on down to this baker.
Yeah, try something new.
Try something new. So you want to be careful about that. You certainly don't want to hide information that you have about where a former vendor might be set up. But your job is to promote the folks that are in the market.
Exactly.
First and foremost.
Yeah.
So,
So if there's similar products at the market, just say, oh, today you can get it here. And we sure did love that vendor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
That's an easier one.
Yeah.
That's a simple one.
That's an easier way to say goodbye if they're going on and doing something,
Yeah.
that they love.
And then there's vendors who retire.
Yeah.
So that's another
Yeah.
way to lose vendors. And we're seeing more of that right now. Maybe because the last year has just been so tough that people who were going to retire in the next few years have said, okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
It's
That's a good time.
kind of a bummer because wouldn't you like to end on a higher note? But I definitely understand that somebody commented in our Facebook group the other day, I've been doing this for 2 years and the last one was 7 years.
Yes.
So that last year was a long one. So.
Counts for a lot of time. Yeah.
And then just the overall growth of markets in America, the last 20 or 30 years has seen huge exponential growth in the number of farmers markets. Mm-hmm. But that means there's a fair amount of farmers and vendors and managers now that have been at it for 2 or 3 decades.
Yeah.
And so now's the time when people are starting to retire. And so we're just seeing people kind of age out, and they've done their several tours of duty.
And the average age of a farmer is quite old now.
Yeah.
So we're seeing a lot of our farmers, if they don't have somebody to pass it on to, or they've, in the last year, they decided, you know what, we developed a good CSA program. I'm going to stop waking up at the butt crack of dawn to get to the market every Saturday and Sunday. Mm-hmm. So that could be another reason too.
Yeah, some of them stay in business, but they've just kind of retired from markets. Especially farmers, we're seeing some more farmers doing farm stands and things at their property as opposed to. Although I just had a conversation with somebody about that's become such a big thing this year. A lot of farmers have found out that they can sell on property, but what's going to happen when people go back to work and kids go back to school, and so it may be that the consumers don't have the time to drive to the farms. Yeah. So we may see some of those folks come back. But these can be kind of tougher conversations with the fellow vendors and the shoppers who love a farmer that they've been going to for years and years and years. We recently had a guy retire who's been with us. I think he's been in our market for 12 years.
Yeah. And for so long. Yeah. And it's so weird now to not, he was the first vendor on site. So I would see, he'd be there before me. And so now, the first morning I went there and he wasn't there, it was really weird.
Yeah.
Because I just got used to it. And so,
And so many shoppers were asking about him and happy, sad, happy for him because he seems like he's going to have a really lovely retirement.
Yeah.
And he was just such a great, super sweet guy that people just miss seeing him at the market.
Yeah, it's just like a lovely human being. So it's hard when a presence like that is just no longer at your market for whatever reason. So, yeah. Bittersweet.
So you probably want to suggest to those vendors or farmers that have been there a long time that they give their fellow vendors and their dedicated shoppers a little heads up. So I think this farmer we're talking about had talked to a few people about the fact that he's retiring, but less than I thought, actually.
Yeah.
And so some people have been really surprised that he's gone. So
I think he's kind of the guy that probably didn't
he's
want,
kind
of
a quiet guy.
Yeah, he's kind of shy.
Yeah, sort of a shy guy. Yeah. So then we needed to talk with him about how much he wanted us to share. Was he going into witness protection and he didn't want us to tell people that he was moving across the country, or was it okay to say, hey, he's retired and he's moved to the East Coast? So
because some people want to say goodbye.
Yeah, yeah. So that's something to consider if you're a market manager or that farmer's neighbor at the market. And speaking of neighbors. That's something else that you might need to think about when you have somebody who's been there a long time that moves. If you're careful about mapping your market, you're putting people next to each other based on how their products complement each other and also how their personalities complement each other. Is this going to be a good match? So you may need to think about changing some other placement near that guy that's missing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And also a big thing for us staff is once that farmer left, we need to be able to direct a lot of those shoppers to, I was talking to this one shopper and she was like, no, she was so sad because she had been out for a couple weeks and then she came the week after it was his last week and she was like, I didn't get to say goodbye. But she was like, oh, dang, okay.
Where do I get beets?
Exactly. So I had to be able to be like, well, it's a happy, sad thing because, unfortunately this farmer's no longer here, but now you can go make a new farmer friend. So I was able to direct her towards somebody else that sold some of the same products and she was happy about that. And then also, depending on what time of year that vendor is going to leave, this farmer, in addition to growing vegetables, he also sold really pretty flowers. Yeah. And unfortunately, he left 2 weeks before Mother's Day. Yeah. And then Mother's Day came around and we were like, dang, we have one less flower vendor. And a lot of people that, maybe they don't come to the market every week, but when they do come, they like to buy his flowers. We're like, no.
Those are my mom's favorite flowers.
Yeah, exactly.
She specifically requested
make sure, if you're a market manager that and sometimes it's hard if, he was moving cross country. So I think that he was like, okay, I need to I'm done at markets,
You
even
need
though
to
I'm not
go.
leaving until later in the summer. But make sure that you have somebody to either fill in, or that you tell your other farmers, like, hey, this farmer is no longer here, so now you can bring more stuff, because you're
exactly.
probably going to
For
get some convert shoppers that are going to start shopping with you because they've lost their regular farmer.
Yeah,
So.
absolutely. Really, really good plan. And, if you can be scouting for a replacement farmer or vendor in that category, that's also a good idea.
Yeah.
So, getting lots of notice. We really are clear with our farmers and vendors that even if they're leaving us, and granted, you only have so much leverage and you're just counting on their goodwill to do this if they're leaving, but we do tell them that we would like as much notice as possible and at least 2 or 3 weeks notice if they're going to leave a market, so that we can plan. Who are we going to fill that space with? Can we find somebody in a complementary category?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And most of them are nice about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
They do that. For the most part.
So then there's one other way that we wanted to talk about that vendors leave markets, and that's actually a recent experience of ours triggered the idea to do this topic today, and that's that you do have vendors that pass away.
Yeah.
And that's the toughest one, especially if it's unexpected, really tricky if it involves violence or sensitive circumstances. It's really tough to manage that, both the emotions of the folks at the market, oftentimes you'll know the family members of the vendor that you've just lost. You want to be careful about how much of their privacy you violate. At the same time, you want to hold everybody up and support them and their needs. So that's really tricky. What's your responsibility as a market manager in that case when you have a market vendor or farmer that passes away?
Yeah.
I think it really depends on the circumstance, and how much information you have, how much accurate information you have.
And that's really important.
That's really important. And sometimes you don't get a lot of accurate information. Sometimes they just don't show up that day. And so you think they overslept, or, you're calling them, they're not answering. And so you don't know. And then when shoppers are asking, or, your staff is asking, you just say, they're not here today. We need to figure out what's going on. So as a market manager in that circumstance where you don't know what's going on, it's just about kind of, plugging that hole during the day and trying to figure out things later. With our recent circumstance, we found out that one of our farmers was in a tragic accident on the way to our market, and fellow farmers that worked on the farm with him were letting us know updates, so we knew in the morning what was going on.
We knew at least part of it. I mean,
just
we knew
part of
there
it.
had been an accident, and then as the day went on, we found out about fatalities and
Yeah. And then they had other workers that had showed up for the day that were waiting for them to come, so they were kind of hanging around and ended up working with some other farmers for the day because they were already at the market. So they just ended up helping someone else because they hadn't showed up. So that person knew some information. There was information just kind of trickling in during the day. So as the market managers and our staff who did, get really terrible news as the market is
At
opening.
6 a.m.
Yeah, exactly. We're setting up, and then, we have to get the market open. It was really a conversation we had, how much are we going to say and to whom? And the staffer from that farm that was there was talking about it, of course, because he was explaining why he wasn't working in their booth.
And he was processing a lot emotionally, too.
For
He had
sure.
been working with them for a really long time, so
Yeah.
we couldn't check his grief. We couldn't
Yeah.
tell him, hey, don't talk to people until we get all the details, because he was just expressing the emotional turmoil that he was experiencing.
Exactly. And then once we got open, the shoppers were wondering where that farmer was. And then, some farmers were mentioning what had happened. And so, of course, they were so distraught
Yeah.
during the day. So it was a lot to process. And especially, our market there's already a lot going on. And just kind of compounding that and deciding, okay, what do we say? And, how much are we going to discuss this? And we had a lot of information, but we had not spoken directly to the immediate family yet, and so we were just trying to discern what are we going to say and to whom. So it's a really tricky kind of situation to be in, and something that you hope never happens at your market, but when it does, it's just something that you need to be kind of sensitive about.
Yeah.
But also understanding that the farmers market is a family. And we
Right.
had shoppers that bought bought produce from this farmer that were just in tears and just couldn't believe it. And just because they just saw them every Saturday, and they felt like that was their family too. So, kind of grieving in the street, and and figuring out what to do as the day kind of went on. So
I think if you've got connection with the family, it's important to reach out to them as early as possible. Obviously, they're probably dealing with trauma, and they may be dealing with logistics issues related to an accident or an incident. So that's not always easy. But if possible, find somebody in the family or as close as possible to the family to express your sympathy and provide support. Let them know that you'll be there for them. And then also to be sure that the information that you're relaying is accurate. So not this accident, but a situation years past was a really awkward situation. We had a vendor that was involved in a bank robbery and lost his life in the process. It was
pretty wild.
It was so crazy.
the night before market day.
Yeah, so early in the morning.
Early in the morning that
we
day,
were calling him to see why he was late, and leaving messages. By the way, be careful about what kind of messages you leave when somebody's late, just in case it turns out to be some really awful situation.
I always remember that when I call people when they're late.
Me too.
I'm like, hey, buddy, you're coming in, instead of like
Y'all right?
yelling. Yeah, you're all right.
Yes, exactly. And I really worry about people now when they're late for, partly because of these reasons.
Absolutely.
But,
you never know
yeah.
what's going on.
Is that
behind
what
the
you texted
scenes.
me this last Saturday when I was late?
Yeah, I did. I said, hey, Justine, you okay?
Oh, dear. Oh, man.
Scarred for life.
Yeah, scarred for life.
There was another vendor, similar situation, not a bank robbery, but a violent situation, a violent end, and a guy who lost his life out in another area east of us not too long ago. And somebody up in Portland, actually, they had a vendor who was killed in his home, and it was a much-loved vendor that had been there for a long time.
Oh, that's right.
And I think they actually set up almost like a little memorial shrine thing for him. I think not that day, but the following week, and they messaged about it in advance so that people could come leave their respects. They could leave flowers. There was a method for them to donate to the family. So
nice.
It's a nice thing to do when it's an odd situation like a bank robbery or something that's involves violent circumstances. It's really tough because you want to honor the family's privacy. You definitely don't want to be giving out bad information. That's the tricky thing about those kind of situations is a lot of times the news folks in their race for a scoop or to fill airtime will start putting out information before they've verified it.
Yeah.
And then that, of course, leads other farmers and vendors who are concerned. They want a lot of info, and they spread a lot of info, not always before it's been verified.
Exactly. The accuracy of the vendor gossip chain is not always what you'd like it to be. So keeping that in mind. And maybe your farmer's market name will be dropped in a news story because this person is associated as a vendor at your market. So, you may be involved in the news story somehow.
That's right. Sometimes the news contacts you. We had the news contact us in one of these situations and, wanted our comment on it. And it wasn't...
Doesn't feel appropriate.
Doesn't feel appropriate. We try to kind of refer them back to the family.
And these vendors, even if they're involved in a crime, they might be a very beloved part of your market.
That's right.
Yeah.
I very much enjoyed that vendor that was involved in that bank robbery. He was very sweet. He was a longtime vendor of ours. I feel like we had all formed friendships with him. He had struggled with things, and we had kind of always talked about it. I felt like we were close with him, so it was difficult to process the death of a vendor, but also with the crime involved. So a friend going through that times 10, because you're also trying to manage the market and trying to manage how to approach that with your fellow vendors and with the shoppers that are at the market.
Yeah. And even in the situation where it wasn't a nefarious end or whatever, when we had a couple just more freak accident situations, even in those situations that, they mentioned that unfortunately this farmer was on the way to the Little Italy Mercado and that's just hard to...
It's hard to read.
It's hard to read because
you feel like you're kind of when I read that, I was like, if he hadn't have been driving to my market, he wouldn't have passed away. That's kind of how it made me feel just seeing our market name in that story, even though obviously I know that's not true. He drove there every Saturday. It was a freak thing. It was another driver that caused the accident. And so it's hard to see your market name mentioned in those kind of stories where there's a tragic death involved, no matter what happened.
Yeah. And then deciding how much, if it's not something that's well known, if it's not getting a lot of news coverage, how do you answer those shoppers' questions?
Yeah.
So we had market vendor passed last year who died in an accident, not anything dramatic, but sad. She was in the hospital for a bit and passed. And what happens now is we still have people show up almost a year later saying, where's this product?
Yeah.
She had a very well-differentiated product. People loved it. And they show up and say, well, where's this product? You have to decide, let's see, how much personal stuff do we want to get into? Do we want to say, well, she passed away?
Yeah, because you don't know, does the
she's not
shopper,
here
like,
anymore.
did she really love and admire this vendor?
Were they a friend?
Do we have a
Yeah.
responsibility to kind of share this with them so they know what happened, so they can kind of get a little closure? Or is it just a shopper looking for this item?
Yeah. Sometimes, it's hard because at the end of the day, we're selling stuff at the market. We want people to be happy and shopping and purchasing from other vendors. And you do kind of have to read the situation sometimes. Like a couple of times recently, people ask, like, hey, where is this? Oh, I'm looking for berries. I always buy berries right here. And so, I think it was the week after, and I was like, I kind of don't want to just like emotionally unload on this person. So I just said, you know what? They're not here today, but we have other berry vendors. They're super delicious. You can find them right here and right here. And so I kind of just judged the situation based on the way that the question was phrased to me.
Right.
Yeah.
And
It's kind of
tough.
a case-by-case basis of how much you're going to speak to the situation that's happening, for sure.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't know what happened, but
Yeah.
you get, we had a baker a few years ago that pulled out, and we knew she had health issues, but we've just sort of heard through the grapevine then that she may have passed, down the line, and we don't really know. We have no details at all. So we've had shoppers approach us and say, do you know what happened to so-and-so? And it's, and we don't really, so we just want to say,
It's hard to discern.
we don't, but we're concerned about her.
Yes, exactly.
yeah, and that might be the case very often for market managers out there, especially in a time where hundreds of thousands of Americans have died in the last year. You might not always know the exact comorbidity or, whatever. And also that gets into really sticky issues surrounding like health privacy. And you don't want to be disclosing things that like legally you're not able to, and or put kind of calling somebody out. And so it's just something that to be really sensitive of. And like Kat said earlier, if you have a relationship with their family or there is a communication line there, just really taking it sensitively and at a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
For sure, yeah.
And if you have a question, I think my advice would be if you have a question about whether to say more or less, I would err on the side of privacy.
Yeah.
So I would say, when in doubt, if you haven't cleared it with the family, if you don't know that your information is accurate, probably just keep it low. They're not here today. What we said the first day after this auto accident, the truck accident, was that we put out social media things that said, we know that this family's been in an accident. We'll be supplying information as more information becomes available, because there was so much rumor flying at that point, and we wanted to make sure that we had accurate information. One of the folks that passed in that accident, we didn't know if his family knew. It's all those things. You just want to be really careful about what you put out. Once you've talked to the family, if there's fundraisers available, we think it's really appropriate to pass those along to our customers, our shoppers. Those folks need help. They need... in the case of this situation and a lot of others that I've seen, and the folks in Portland were the same, a lot of times people in the farming and food industries are not the most financially stable.
Yeah.
And their business is set up to a place that they need that income every week to keep going. And so one of the really sad things is we're missing this person, and his family is not only desperately sad and missing him, but they also needed his income this week.
Yeah.
So anytime that I don't necessarily think, and that's another thing that's just a judgment call, but I don't think we've ever established a fundraiser for a market vendor or farmer that we've lost, but we've definitely gone to the trouble to seek out any fundraisers, GoFundMes, any of those kind of supportive operations that a family member or a friend has started, and we've made sure to broadcast those as widely as possible, because those families are going to need help not just with the final arrangements, but with income as they go through trauma and as they get their lives back together to figure out how they're going to support themselves.
Yeah, and I think just from like a processing and grieving point of view, having actionable items is a helpful way to like kind of get on with your day. And obviously you're going to hold that sadness with you and you're going to need to go through that. But if you have something that you feel like you can do, it tends to help. And that was a helpful talking point when shoppers were concerned or when they asked or they said, oh, I noticed this vendor's been out. Like, what happened? And they kind of knew something was weird just because they were a very consistent vendor, never missed a week. And so we were able to kind of break the news gently and say, but you know what? If you have, maybe you take the money you would spend on berries this week and you kick it over to their GoFundMe. It just kind of seemed to somewhat be able to end the conversation on a high note or give them something that they could.
I think they really wanted to help.
They felt helpful. And I feel like that's why GoFundMes are, so popular and they work, is because when someone passes away or someone's in trouble with their health or whatever, you'd want to do something, and usually there's nothing you can do. I can't do anything for that
change
person's
the
family.
situation.
I can't change it. But when I donate, a couple bucks or, my $20 berry budget, it makes, it's kind of makes me feel like I'm contributing a little bit to healing that grief for the family. And it does make people feel better. And I feel like, when your family's hurting, which is how these shoppers kind of feel about the vendors that they shop from regularly, it was really helpful to say, hey, you could, support the family in this way. And they were, I think, relieved to kind of have an outlet for that. Well, another farmer at the market the next day at a different Sunday market, not our market, took it upon themselves to just say, hey, like, we can't believe this happened. They were all in shock, and they just put kind of a jar out and told people, we're just going to raise a bunch of money. This is before the GoFundMes had been kind of established, and they just, shoppers that couldn't believe it, that their berry farmer wasn't there, just gave this other farmer money, and that farmer, split it to the family. So it just kind of is a tool to help people process things like that. So, that's helpful, and it's helpful to be able to tell your shoppers that that's available.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's nice to see the other vendors at the market. I always, when those GoFundMes are up there, you can see little comments or you can see names of people who have donated on there, and it's just like, this is a family. All, a lot of other vendors and farmers at the market will, kick in $5 or $20 and just to acknowledge, hey, I saw them every morning and, their bright smile was so great and they made me laugh every week and I'll really miss them at the market. And I think that's great for the families to hear. Because the families aren't coming to the market usually.
It's this one aspect of their identity that probably their families, a lot of, especially in this case, they did work with family, but that's not always the case. So it's nice to hear, like, oh, they were as wonderful at work as they were all the time.
Yeah, so then their families say that, like, oh, wow, they really were like a, bright light at this market. I never knew that. And so it's nice to get this kind of feedback from
we have heard that back
from vendors,
from families too, that it was so great to hear how much they were loved at the market.
Yeah.
And then you need to remember to support yourself. There was a market manager actually that passed away about 7 or 8 years ago from our state who had started multiple markets. She'd been in the market industry for 20 plus years, was nearing retirement and passed suddenly of a heart attack. And the grief in the whole market community, market managers that she had lent a hand or given some advice to over the years, new market managers and new vendors and things. There were so many people that missed her. And so you need to remember to take care of yourself too. Yeah. So while you're the market mom or dad and you're the market manager and you're kind of setting an example and you're helping people navigate, don't forget to take some time for yourself. Let yourself grieve. Might take a glass of wine later. Stop for a minute and let yourself absorb that you've had a loss. You've experienced a loss here, and that it's okay to grieve, and you got to keep that market going probably for the next few hours. But when you get a chance to breathe, let down a little bit and take care of yourself.
Yeah, I know we all had a very mellow Sunday the next day, us three, just kind of processing that whole day. So, and just continue to do so, just thinking about it. So. Yeah, just be sure to take care of yourself and your staff. We had a staffer that was really upset, and, people get really close with the farmers and vendors, and so just treat it like any other loss that you would, and just allow that kind of space to happen. So.
All those things that apply to losses in your family. Farmers markets are families.
It's
true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thanks for listening today.
Yeah. Thanks for making it through.
Yeah, we just felt like this was important to talk about because it is an aspect of managing a farmer's market. And it can feel very lonely to run a farmer's market because you feel like you're the only person that's in charge and you're the only person that has to make decisions about these kind of things. But, you're not. There's a whole group of us who have had to navigate these kind of things. So we're with you. If you have had to go through this, or if you do go through it in the future, just know that you're doing the right thing and you'll get through it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a big family, and bigger family you have, the more losses, unfortunately, you're subject to. So
That's the numbers.
if you're in it for a while, it's going to happen.
That's right. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks for listening today, and big thanks to Farmers Market Coalition for supporting farmers, market operators, and communities, and for their support of Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast.
Farmers markets are all about community, and all of us, operators, farmers, and vendors, keep learning. Connect with people just like you from various parts of the country and share what's happening in your area in the terrific conversations over in our private Facebook group, the Farmers Market Pros Community. Please find us there, answer the 3 qualifying questions, and join the group. You can also message us on Instagram at Farmers Market Pros or email us at connect@farmersmarketpros.com. If you're just getting started in farmers markets, check out our Vendor 101 online course at farmersmarketpros.com. Thanks for listening to Tent Talk. Please leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you access your podcast, and tell us and others how you're enjoying Tent Talk. If you are listening on YouTube, give us that thumbs up. And be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss the next episode. Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast, is proudly produced by Farmers Market Pros, where passion meets profit. Today's episode was recorded and edited by Justine Marzoni Mead. Original music by David Mead. Thank you so much for listening today, and we will have another great episode next week, so tune in.